All right. All right, I think I'm live. There we go. All right, I'm back. Second live stream this week, and we are going to be talking more about orchestration today. Specifically, we are going to be learning about orchestral textures. Now, textures are, it's kind of the word you use when you refer to the number and types of layers that you can work with in the orchestra. Now, there's really no limit to the number and types of layers you can work with, but there are four general categories that you're most likely to come across. So in today's lesson, we're going to learn about those four basic categories, and then we are going to learn just two of the textures from the most useful or most I should say reliable of the four textures. Now, before we do that, there is just a little bit of house cleaning we gotta take care of real quick. First is that this is the 7th video in the series. So far we've learned about instrumentation, we've learned about my approach for the 9 parameters in music, and most recently we learned different strategies for finding the right instruments to perform the part in your music. We're going to be using the same basic idea that we did for the last video today. But we're just going to be kind of expanding on it, starting at just a piano sketch, and then if we've got time, maybe orchestrating a little something, which might seem weird. How can we talk about orchestration without orchestrating? We'll see. We'll see if we can. So this is also going to be the last stream I do on a Thursday for a while. I will keep streaming on Tuesdays whenever I can, but starting in October, I'm going to get back to my usual posting on Thursdays. So it'll be a short video on Monday and Wednesday, live stream on 2 for a live composing lesson like this, and then Thursdays are going to be back to the more traditional longer uploads, the longer tutorials. And starting in October, I'm going to be having a specific topic of advanced orchestration techniques, some of which you might know recognize from these live streams that we've been doing. You guys have really helped inspire me to do another series on orchestration, so thank you for that. Last things, and the check-in is here. Just don't forget, all right, this is a live stream, all right? This is an opportunity to ask questions. Yes, I have this lesson plan, and yes, I have all these notes, all these things, but the thing is, these are going to be available after the stream anyways, and you can always read through this, take your own notes, practice, and revisit. If there's anything that you want me to address live, maybe something that doesn't come up in the lesson plan, please, for all, don't hesitate, just put it in the comments, all right? As well as share any topics you have for future videos, because I'm going to be doing a whole new series on orchestration starting in October, like I just said. And I'll probably, I think so far I've planned out 9 videos for that series. So that's going to last about 9 weeks. So that will cover most of the orchestration stuff. So if there's anything else you guys want to learn in these live streams other than orchestration, let me know. Other than that, yeah, I think that's it for announcements. So just keep adding questions in the comments. Looks like we've got a couple already. This is great. I find orchestration can be overwhelming at times. Wonderful. I hope that I'm able to help Entropy Addict. I do. I really enjoy helping and kind of clarifying some of these things because, you know, it wasn't easy to learn. And thank you, Benzie. Thank you for the thumbs up. All right, so let's dive in. So first things first, let's put up our trusty little notepad. Delete all our notes from the last video because we don't need those anymore. And let's get right back to work. So texture, if you'll remember, if you were here for the very first stream, you'll remember that texture refers to the, the number and types of different layers in your music. Now, texture is super important. This is essentially a big, of course, it's one of the big 9. It's one of the big parameters of music that helps shape the personality and energy level of your music. Now, there are a ton of different types of textures, all right? So, you could think of it as like melody plus chords plus bass line, maybe melody plus counter melody plus bass line, maybe 4 melodies just being played at the same time. Maybe you're just doing a whole bunch of ostinati all at the same time. But really, the kind of different layers that you create and the way you layer them is up to you. And you are more than welcome to experiment and try all these different things. But in general, there are essentially 4 basic types of textures. All right, and these are linear textures, accompanimental textures, soundscape textures, and hybrid textures. Now, a linear texture is essentially a one-layer texture. All right. Now, if we get the chance to explore the different types of linear textures eventually, which we will in the new orchestration series coming up, there are multiple different ways that you can approach a linear texture, some of them with multiple kinds of ideas. But the idea here is that you have just one primary layer. In other words, the linear textures are different strategies for arranging a single melodic line. All right, so you've got the idea of the monophonic texture, which is literally just one melody. All right, and it is just shared either in unison or in octaves. All right, and that is simultaneously capable of being the most intimate or the most powerful texture you can possibly create with the orchestra. Now, there's also things like the heterophonic texture, which is you write a melody and then you layer it with variations of itself. So sometimes you have, for example, the strings are playing a very beautiful melody, and then you've got the flutes playing an embellished version with a lot more notes above it. And maybe the double reeds are playing below with a simplified version, only hitting the most important notes. And then the third type of linear texture is the chordal texture, which you've got one melody, one rhythmic idea, and they're kind of layered with chordal tones. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the linear textures today. We don't have time to go over every single texture, so we're going to focus our efforts on just the most useful textures, which are the accompanimental textures, which can essentially be broken down to melody plus accompaniment plus bass line. Now, there are 2 primary accompanimental textures, the homophonic and the polythematic. These are by far the most useful, most common, if you will, textures available in Western theory. The vast majority of film music is going to have to do with this kind of texture. We will be focusing most of our effort specifically on these textures today, but we should talk just quickly about the other 2 types, soundscapes, which are non-melodic in nature, which I shouldn't say melodic, because counterpoint is one of these, and it's very, counterpoint is very melodic. It's only melodies. It's a whole bunch of different melodies layered together. So I should say non-thematic in nature. So these are the types of textures you would use when you don't really care about having a primary theme sticking out to your audience. All right, so this would be like counterpoint. This would be something called polyrhythmic, which is a bunch of layered ostinati. And it could also be onomatopoeic, which is essentially you're just trying to mimic real-world sounds with the orchestra. Now, again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the soundscape textures, but I will have a dedicated video for them and how to write them, the kind of tips of how to use them within a month or 2 when we get to that point in the new orchestration series. And the last texture type, the hybrid textures, is a combination of any 2 textures. And this is typically linear plus accompanimental. But honestly, it's up to you. You can definitely create a bit of accompanimental texture with a soundscape texture. The onomatopoeic texture in particular for soundscapes, which is, again, you're mimicking real-world sounds, is a very common hybrid texture. I remember one piece that I wrote a while ago. Didn't do much with it. I started it, finished it, and wanted to come back to it, but I haven't yet. I plan to. But the whole point was it was to tell how it was music I wrote for a short story that I had really enjoyed that take place in Detroit. And so the opening introduction, I used the orchestra to try and mimic a lot of the sounds that you can hear in Detroit, or really any big city. I used to spend a lot of time in Detroit. I love it. I used to work there for a number of years, get a special place in my heart. And so I used, I think it was like I had the brass instruments blowing into their instruments without actually creating any noise. I had a snare drummer doing a roll with wire brushes, all these kind of things to like mimic the sound of distant traffic. I won't get too into that. We don't need to do that too much, but it's kind of the idea that you can mimic real world sounds and create a soundscape. And then I layered it with some like chords and a bass line to make it accompanimental. But at this point, I'm just kind of rambling. Today, our focus is on the accompanimental textures. All right, so we talked about how the accompanimental textures are essentially melody plus accompaniment plus bass line. Now, in particular, there are two fundamental types of accompanimental textures, and that's what we're going to be exploring today. The first type is the homophonic texture. All right, and this is the idea of a melody plus chordal accompaniment plus a bass line. So there are lots of different ways you can have chordal tension. So, for example, let's take a look at our initial theme, this initial sketch. Here we have a homophonic structure. We have a melody, we have chords, and we have a very simple bass line. If we listen to it all together, it's a very simple idea. All right, so this is pretty much your vanilla homophonic textures. All right, it's a melody, it's a chord accompaniment, it's a bass line, and in particular, for this theme, I used a sustained chord strategy. All right, so sustained chords are kind of like your go-to vanilla option. All you're doing is playing the chord and sustaining it for however long you need it to work. And this is a very simple concept, but it is very effective, which actually brings me into this idea of, let's talk about the greatest strength of the homophonic texture. All right, so the homophonic texture, melody plus chords plus bass line, is by far the most common texture you can possibly find in Western music. In particular, this is the texture used for songs. This is the texture used for many themes in film music. This is the kind of texture that you hear in music on a daily basis. It's kind of the inbred understanding of how most people have. It's basically what everybody understands music to be. Melody plus chords plus bass line. And because this is so common, its greatest strength is its familiarity. All right, so when I'm working with young composers a lot of people seem to try and want to stay away from the homophonic texture. It's boring, it's cliche, it's overdone, all these different things that people, all these different complaints that they have with it. But what you don't understand is, or what you may not understand, I should say, is that familiarity and breeds intuitiveness. All right, so because this is such a widely used texture, the idea of melody plus chords plus bass line feels intuitive. It feels right to most listeners. And so when you do something that feels right, it helps increase the chances that your theme itself is actually going to be remembered, that it's going to be whistled. You're not having to spend too much effort trying to figure out what your melody is, because it's not having to fight with any other layers or any other ideas. So the idea that this is probably the single most useful texture that you can master, you could very well get away with writing 90% of your music in this texture if you wanted to. You don't have to, but just to know that this texture, even though it's common and familiar, does not mean that it's played out, if that makes sense. So the idea is that the sustained chord strategy here, which we just witnessed, is one of 3 basic approaches you can take. And like I said, it's the kind of default. All right, it provides harmonic context, it provides support, and you can get a little creative with it, but that's about all it does. If you want, you can also use rhythmic chords. These provide a bit more energy and life to your texture. So we just listened to the typical sustained version. Let's give it another. Yeah, that's nice enough. But you can also give a little bit more of a rhythmic identity to your chords. So if you look down here, rather than just having the chord sustain for its entire value and move on, I gave this chord progression a bit more of a rhythmic idea. I pulled it back so it doesn't start right on the beat 1. The bass line is still mostly sustaining, but you can see I split things up just a little bit, gave a little more variety here and there. And what you're going to hear is this version has a little more bounce, a little more energy, a little more personality to it. Now, a couple of pointers with the rhythmic chords. The idea is, if you want to build energy, I say that a lot, don't I? The idea is, the strategy is. But basically, yeah, the idea here is that shorter intervals, shorter notes at the end of a measure. If we zoom out and look at the whole measure, we have a shorter note ending it, which helps propel us right into the next measure. We have this kind of energy. Whereas at the end, I have a longer note at the end of the measure. In fact, this is the longest note in the measure, which helps slow down the energy. And that's just a real handy tip to kind of be aware of when you're working with rhythmic chords. If you want to build forward momentum, then use shorter notes at the end of each measure. If you want to slow down your energy, then use longer notes at the end of your measure. Now, the last type of chordal accompaniment that we'll talk about today are arpeggios, or arpeggiated chords, which provide a bit more phrasing and personality. And it's the idea that you can move through the different notes of each underlying chord to kind of give it almost a slightly melodic quality. It's not quite melodic, but it definitely has more movement. Now you're going to notice that this particular arrangement isn't going to have as much energy as the rhythmic one did, because I'm working with much slower, straighter rhythms here. But you're going to notice that it also has a little more personality, especially in the second half, when you'll notice I no longer do single note arpeggios. I now do multiple voices, where they're moving in thirds with each other. So let's give this a quick listen. So again, and then another thing that we could very easily do is just use a combination of the 3. So you'll notice that my bass line is sustained. We've got arpeggios now. So what if we added just a little bit of rhythmic identity here? So we'll just, we'll just shorten and lengthen a couple of notes. Let's give this a listen. And suddenly it has a little more energy to it, a little more personality. And if we were to continue into the second half and do the same thing, of course, that would impact that as well. So the idea is when you're working with a homophonic texture, it doesn't just need to be melody plus sustained chords plus bass line. Even though this is the most common texture, one of the reasons why it is so common, why it is so intuitive, why it is so familiar to your audiences, is because it provides context for your melody while still having ample opportunities for variety. You could have an entire piece written in the homophonic texture and never change textures, never switch to polythematic, monophonic, or any of the other kind of textures that are available that we'll talk a little bit more at the end of this video. But you could really just stick in the homophonic texture the entire time, melody plus chordal accompaniment plus bass line. Let's say section 1, you use sustained chords. Then section 2, you start to build your energy. Section 3 is a little more kind of romantic in sound, so you go more arpeggiated in nature. And then in section 4, you bring it home by combining all 3 elements together. You could also create combinations of sustained and arpeggiated chords. You can create, for example, if you have your bass line doubled in octaves or perfect fifths and it's just sustained. And then you have a small, short little arpeggio idea in the upper harmonic voices. Really, the opportunities and different options are pretty, I'm not going to say they're endless, because of course it's never endless, but it's pretty close, all right? Because even within rhythmic chords, you could use rhythmic chords the entire time through an entire piece and yet just switch your rhythmic motif. There's really a lot of creativity here, which is what makes this particular texture in orchestral context one of the most useful and enduring. Now, before we move on from here, let's actually try orchestrating a couple of these, just because we can. But in the meantime, let's see, any more questions? Aditya, hey, good to see you, Aditya. Glad you could make it to the chat. Did I get a chance to watch Rob Scaling? Not yet. It's still on my, I've got it on my index card here. No, not that one. That's stuff I need to make. Oh, yeah, right here. Rob Scallion in my chicken scratch writing. I've got notes all over the place, but I still need to watch them. I'm excited, though, but thank you for the reminder. And to be addict, would you ever do a video or stream on writing modal progressions? Whenever I try to write modal progressions, I feel like they're not actually modal, but just in their relative or Ionian or Aeolian. Definitely. So the main issue with writing in modal, in fact, what we, let's see, yeah, the main issue with writing modal chord progressions is people don't know how to end them. All right, or I shouldn't say people in general, but lots of the times composers don't understand how to use a cadence in modal harmony. And if you use just the typical 5-to-1, kind of that, I don't know why my computer was lagging there for a second, but if you just kind of have that 5-7-to-1 sound, that's a very major minor sound. All right, that is heard in major key going back to so G major 7, G dominant 7 to C major, or we could do E dominant 7 to A minor in the minor key. Because remember, the difference between a minor key and a natural minor scale, or the Aeolian mode, I should say. So the difference between a minor key and an Aeolian mode is that the minor key will always borrow from the harmonic minor to create that E dominant 7. In the Aeolian mode, it's just E minor 7, not E dominant 7. So all of this to say that really all you need to do is learn how to use modal cadences. And without getting into it too deep here, because I do have a short video coming up next month, I believe. In October, one of these short videos, which come out Monday and Wednesdays, is going to be all about modal cadences. So the general idea, I will say here, is, let's just going away from topic a little bit today. Modal cadences. So you have essentially major and minor modes, right? The only mode that doesn't get divided into a major or minor characteristic is Locrian. all right, because its first chord is not a major triad or a minor triad. Its first chord is a diminished triad, so it's kind of its own animal. But let's say our major modes are Ionian, we have Lydian, and Mixolydian. All right, our minor modes are Aeolian, Dorian, and Phrygian. And again, Locrian is off on its own, all right? Now, we know that Ionian is just another word for the major scale. We know that Aeolian is just another name for the natural minor scale. So that gives us 4 unique modes. Now, the reason why one of the reasons why we separate them into major and minor is because Lydian has just one note that makes it different from Ionian. In fact, let's kind of look at this. So if we write out a C major scale, all right, so we've got C major. All you got to do to find Lydian is take the 4th scale degree and raise it. All right, now you have C Lydian, which has that very characteristic major 2 chord. This one note difference is entirely what makes the difference between Lydian and major, and every mode has this. All right, so the thing that makes, why is my computer lagging so much today? What makes C Mixolydian is the 7th. It gets dropped 1/2 step. That's the only difference between the 2 scales. C major has B natural. C Mixolydian has B flat. These unique notes are called characteristic tones. All right? Now, a chord that contains one of the characteristic tones equals characteristic chord. These are the chords in each mode that give the mode its personality. All right, so I gave the example of C Lydian, all right? So in C major, the first chord is C major. The second chord is D minor. However, in C Lydian, the second chord is D major, as a very Lydian sound. So, a modal cadence, where did my note thing go? All right, so a modal cadence simply uses a characteristic chord in place of a 5/7 chord. So if you want to end a chord progression in C Lydian, say we're going C, E, G, and then we'll just go E, G, B. We'll go, let's see, I'm trying not to use any Lydian chords in particular. So let's just go A minor. Now, traditionally, this is where we would put our 5/7 chord. If we want to end our chord progression, we go C major, E minor, A minor, go to G major, and then it wraps up at C major. If we want to make it clear that this is C Lydian and not C major, we're not going to use that G dominant 7. Instead, what we are going to use is one of our characteristic chords, which, if you remember, in C Lydian would be D major. And suddenly, now when we use a modal cadence, our chord progression, which otherwise sounds just like a C major chord progression, suddenly takes on a much more modal personality. All right, that one chord, going back to that one, is more than enough to help maintain your presence within a mode. Now, you can experiment with the different characteristic chords within any of the modes you want. But like I said, for the most part, these 4 are really the most common modes that most people are trying to work with when they talk about writing in modal music. So, I'm not going to take the time to go through all the distinct characteristic chords in each mode, so I'm just going to give you a couple tips. Stick to triads. Don't mess around with seventh chords or extended, especially not extended chords. Seventh chords you can kind of get away with, but the triads are going to get where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, at least in a modal cadence. And try to stick to authentic modal cadences. The idea that you go straight from your characteristic chord and it resolves right away to the tonic of your mode. That's what's going to help land you solidly within your mode of choice. If you try to mess around with deceptive cadences or anything like that, that's when you start to lose the sound. Remember, modes are a lot more fragile than the typical major or minor key, just because we're not used to listening to a lot of modal music. The vast majority of music, especially nowadays, is all in either the major key or the minor key. So if you're going to be in the mode, you really need to make sure that you're sticking to your guns and making sure that you're trying to give yourself the best chance possible to really nail home to your audience that this is modal music. I hope that helps. That definitely went way off course, but like I said, I don't care. If this is literally how my music lessons go with all my students. I've got some students who prefer that I lecture for an hour, which I'm more than happy to do. I love doing that. I love listening to myself talk. Then I have other students which I really enjoy as well, where they don't want me to sit for an hour. I've got one student in particular who most of the time we get off base very quickly. We get the lesson starts and we just end up talking about his music. We talk about what I'm doing. I answer whatever questions he has on whatever he's bringing up or any ideas that he discovered, and it's a lot of fun. We learn a lot. And then afterwards, again, I just share the lesson plan. It's got all these notes in it that he can use to study afterwards. So that's a bit of a ramble. Also a little bit of an ad. If you're interested in private lessons, the link is below. First session is free. We just talk about your goals and everything, make sure that it's a good fit. Then after that, yeah, it depends on what kind of package you're looking for. But let's see. It looks like we got a lot more questions. So yeah, Entropy Addict. I hope that helps. Sean Gilbert, joined in late. Is there a specific word I can look up for different homophonic strategies? It's been on my mind lately, especially ways I could break them down. Different homophonic strategies. Unfortunately, not off the top of my head. I'd say just exactly this. Probably the two strategies you're looking for the most, because sustained chords are kind of self-explanatory. But I would just look up for different ways to write rhythmic chords. Learn about rhythm a bit. Learn about arpeggios. Learn about what kind of shapes you can create, etc., etc. Now, for each of these textures, all right, which we may or may not have time to get to all of them, Ryan Leach, YouTube channel, incredible YouTube channel. He's having a competition right now that is awesome. You can win an opportunity to have your music performed. So check out his channel. Wonderful teacher, incredible teacher. Love his videos. He has a playlist on orchestral textures that goes through each of these textures. It is woefully underappreciated. Those videos do not have nearly as many views as they deserve. But with that being said, all of those videos are basically teaching you through the book Creative Orchestral Strategies, I believe is what it's called, by George Frederick McKay. This book right here, I just finished reading it a couple weeks ago. Incredible. Lots of fantastic information. It's written in a very almost kind of modern approach. I really enjoyed it. Downside is it wasn't very popular when he published it, so there aren't a lot of copies left anymore. So check out at libraries, university libraries, or if you've got a little bit of money burning a hole in your pocket, go online. I know I found mine at my old college's library, so I was able to get a copy of it from them. And I've got to return it soon. But yeah, so fantastic resources to continue learning about these textures if for whatever reason we don't have time to get to all of them. So let's see, Matt Lewis. So in band terms, homophonic equals playing chords on guitar with a melody over the top. Polyphonic equals guitar riff with melody. Polyphonic would be something else. Polyphonic is one of those soundscape textures that we talked about. You've got the homophonic down pretty much well. Polyphonic is something else. It is counterpoint. All right, you've got multiple distinct melodies being layered on top of each other. Because of that, none of them really take the front stage. They never take from center stage. None of them demand the most attention. Instead, they kind of work together to create more of an ambience, more of a lush soundscape, hence the name soundscape textures. What you're thinking about with like the riff over underneath the chords is the polythematic texture, which is something we're going to talk about in just a moment. Entropy. Let's see. Sean Gilbert. Modal strategy cadence with voice leading versus trying to use functional harmony. Also, chord prolongation is stupidly useful in modal versus chordal loops. Yes, very much. Yes, Sean Gilbert. Wonderful strategies. The idea is when you are using modal harmony, don't be afraid to just loop chords. All right. Don't be afraid to just sustain chords. All right. This progression is a perfectly strong Dorian progression. Just kind of loop it over and over again and just build a beautiful melody over it. That's a perfectly strong strategy for modes. Anytime you're working kind of in a tonal approach, which is modal, and weaker than the typical functional keys, like functional harmony, major and minor keys, modal music, you cannot underestimate or overestimate the sheer power of repetition and prolonging chords, just holding them much longer. The reason why is because those are such unique sound combinations. We do not have a minor 1 to a major 4 in most minor key music. And it's such a unique sound that it can hold its own a lot better than, say, A minor to D minor. You do that over and over again, it doesn't have the same pull, at least not to me, that we have from minor 1 to major 4. So yes, thank you, Sean. Great tips. Antibiotic, these are some killer tips. Thank you. Wonderful. Glad I could help. Aaron, I like the off-course topics. Great, me too. It's because then I don't have to worry about being prepared or anything. I can just spout stuff off the top of my head, and I love that. I love just kind of rambling. If you've been on this channel for any amount of time, you might know that about me already. I tend to ramble a lot, but I enjoy geeking out about this kind of stuff. So, Aditya, thanks for being like this. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm glad I can help. Sean, Creative Orchestration is a good book for sure. Definitely cannot recommend it enough. Aditya, did you see that Ryan Leach's video? Any advice or pointers about that image? Ooh, good point. That's right. I did see the video, and I gotta say, I love the picture. All right, so for those of you who haven't seen it, actually, I'm not going to pull it up on here because I don't know if my computer can take it. Ryan Leach is having a competition, a composing competition, where he provides a picture, and you've got to write the music. All right, so my greatest recommendation, use the emotion tool that I have shared on my channel. If you go to my channel, all right, if you go to my channel's page, the posted video is something along the lines of like therapy tools for writing music. And it's essentially a chapter of my first book that I wrote. It's going to go through my personal approach to writing emotional music. Follow the strategy in that video. If you want to, this is just what I would do. I can't say this is the best version. But really try to set yourself in the mood of that image. Come up with a story. Come up with a setting, an emotional kind of idea. When you're writing music for a picture, you're not writing music for the picture. You're writing music for the story that picture tells. So immerse yourself in it. Take some time. Figure out a story. Write a story yourself. It doesn't need to be long. Just a paragraph or two. Come up with a story and then write a theme for it. I have a playlist I did very recently on film scoring. A lot of the tools in that series could be very useful for this approach and how to study the story, break it down, figure out what aspects of it need to be translated to music. So yeah, again, my entire approach about music is tell a story. Story, 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 all right? Everything in music, in my opinion, is about telling a story. So, and I'm not the only one with that opinion. So yeah, that would be my advice. Let's see. Sean Gilbert, Eric Hoding has this awesome YouTube channel of orchestral reductions of the KOTOR and Skyrim soundtrack. So much of it is written in Dorian. It is just 1-5-6, 1-5-6 over and over again. Definitely, right? Especially video game music. Video game music, by necessity, is incredibly repetitive because it needs to loop. So yeah, whenever you're working in modal music, go for it. Never feel afraid to just get repetitive in your harmony, especially your harmony. Harmony can always be repetitive. I like to spend a lot of time on this channel talking about creative harmonic choices, just because that's my own personal preference. I am fascinated by harmony. I love studying harmony. I love writing interesting chord progressions. But it doesn't have to be that way. Hans Zimmer, for example, is a very, very successful and famous composer who uses very, very simple chord progressions. It's entirely an incredible approach you can take, is have that simplicity and focus on the other aspects of your music. So never get too bogged down on trying to constantly be complicated. A professor of mine shared some great advice. He says the only people who care how impressive or complicated your composition, like your chord progression is you, and probably some other composers. No one else cares. Everyone else cares about the big picture. They all care about what does the music sound like. The composers are the only ones who are going to be in there going, oh, are you repeating that chord progression? And even then, most of them are just going to be jealous that you're able to make something so simple work so incredibly well. So don't overthink it. Let's see here. Aditya, me too. I also love that bitch. It's a really cool one. I'm excited. Sean Gilbert, Jeremy Soule has so much great strategies for writing in modality. My favorite strategy is the passing tonic prolongation that starts from minor 1. I'm assuming that is you're using what's it called? Figured bass. So minor 1, I think that's second inversion 5. Minor 1, 5 second inversion. Minor 1 first inversion. Minor 5 second inversion. Minor 1. That is a really fun strategy. So if I'm reading that correctly, that's let's go with A minor, minor 1. That's a minor 5. That's a minor 1. Nope, that's a major 1. That would be minor 1, then 2 in second inversion, and then minor 1. That's a fun one, yeah. I wrote Skyrim KOTOR soundtracks justify it. Yes, I love Jeremy Soule's music. Incredibly well done. Okay, awesome. So I'm caught up on the comments. Thank you, everybody. I love this. I think this is the most fun I've had on a stream in a while. But let's get to the last texture we're gonna talk about. Well, first, let's do this. So I have 4 tips for using the homophonic texture. All right, the first tip: give each layer its own distinct register / octave so they don't overlap, particularly when you're sketching. So if we take a look at the music, you'll look at each of these sketches, you'll see there's no overlap. There's no moment where the melody overlaps with the chords, which if I had just dropped an octave, it very well could have done. But I made sure not to do that. Same with the bass line. The bass line never overlaps with the chords, and that's the same for every single one of these. This is a matter of clarity in your arrangement. Now, naturally, if I decided down the line I wanted to have this and just double the melody an octave lower, of course I can do that if I want to. It's just in this initial sketch, you want to make sure that each of the layers are successfully kept separate from each other to make sure that your music sounds clear and intuitive. Second tip, you don't need to use full chords all the time. All right, sometimes focusing just on essential tones that don't appear prominently in the melody or bass line can be more than enough. This is the idea that if you want to create a more kind of intimate sound, you can definitely do this. So down here we see C. The bass line is essentially just root quote notes. So if I wanted to, I could go through, find all these root notes, everything that's already played in the bass line, and just delete it. And get a slightly more intimate sound. naturally, this is not going to be nearly as impactful on the piano as it would, say, a full-scale orchestration. But especially if you want that intimate string arrangement, it's very much about limiting your harmonic notes to only what's necessary so you can create a very intimate, quiet kind of setting. The third tip, you know what, I'm going to stop typing these out. I'm just going to share the lesson plan, all right? Third tip, your bass lines don't always have to consist of simple sustained pitches, all right? You can treat your bass line as an opportunity for additive accentuation, which is essentially highlighting notes, important notes in typically the melody. Or you can even write in more complex and interesting line if desired. And I have a video on that in my playlist, Harmony for Composers. You can learn how to write a more interesting kind of melodic, motivic bass line if you're interested. And then the final tip is the simpler and less rhythmically active your melody is, the further it should be distanced from your accompanimental material in order to maintain focus. So if I had just a very kind of slow, lulling, kind of sustained melody, that's not the strongest melody. Not to say it's not a good melody, meaning it's not the strongest in beating out all the other layers in your music, especially if you have more rhythmic background. And if that is the case, you want to make sure you do have more space. Make sure the melody is maybe up here, and your kind of accompaniments way down here. Why is my keyboard lagging as well? That's my whole computer. Okay. Anyway, so those are my 4 tips for using the homophonic texture. We are rapidly running out of time. But yeah, so feel free to throw any questions down below. Let's just very quickly talk about the second accompanimental texture, which is the polythematic texture, right? Which essentially is melody plus counter melody or counter melodies and bass line. All right, so the whole purpose of this texture is it becomes significantly more lush, significantly more interesting. Anytime you hear something called lush in music, it means it's filled with movement. Each line is kind of alive. Each line has an idea. Every line is interesting. So the music is lush with interesting material. Now, the polythematic texture is, after the homophonic, the most common texture found in film scores in particular. So a lot of the time when you hear counterpoint, or what you assume is counterpoint, multiple melodies going on in film music, it's actually a polythematic texture. The reason why is we're working with a counter melody, not a counterpoint. I think I've talked about this on the channel before, but the difference between counterpoint and a counter melody. In counterpoint, every single melody is equal. All right, you are not meant to focus on one primary melody. You're meant to hear all of them working together, which is why counterpoint's not typically a thematic or used thematically in movie music, because it's very difficult to have one melody stand out on top of the others. A counter melody is another melodic idea, but it is 100% subservient to your primary melody, which means when you are playing this, there is a primary melody, a primary theme that you want the audience to pay attention to. And the counter melody, or counter melodies, are subservient. They're meant to provide context, provide movement, provide personality, without actually competing with the primary melody. So this is essentially the go-to texture anytime you want to have a kind of lush, vibrant, complicated sounding texture in your themes. All right, so for this, we need to learn how to write them. And, of course, tips for using it. All right, first, it looks like we've got some questions. You interpreted polythematic as homophonic, but harmony lines are just very melodic. Yes, very much, exactly. That's very much. There are so many pieces where I became obsessed with trying to learn counterpoint, because I was like, this has got to be counterpoint. This has got to be like part writing. It's got to be something. And then when I finally learned these different strategies for polythematic, I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. I probably didn't need to spend all that time studying counterpoint, but I'm glad I did. It's a useful trait, if not as common or as useful, but we'll see. All right, so I'm rambling again. Aditya, I actually submitted a piece, a very bad one, in the July competition. Would you like to give some feedback? Of course, do. I'd love to. Aditya, my email is tabletopcomposer@gmail.com. All right, yeah, send it to me. If you've got sheet music, that's great. If not, you can send me an audio. I'm perfectly fine with just audio. It's helpful if I have a MIDI version of it. I cannot promise I'll give a detailed response. And that goes for anyone who's watching this, whether you're live now or watching it later. If you ever want to send me music, go for it. All right, I love listening to the music that you guys write. It keeps me excited. All right, being on just one side of a computer, it can be easy to lose sight of just kind of the impact that I'm able to have on people, and that I'm actually helping make a difference in some people's lives. And so when I get an email, or I get a comment, or I get a message that sharing stuff that they wrote, and how sharing that I was able to help in some small way at least bring it to life, that really it helps me. All right, it helps make me excited. It helps reinvigorate me. So yes, please, if you want to share your music, send it, please. Like I said, can't promise I'll give a very detailed response, but I'm always welcome. I'm always willing to help give a couple pointers here and there. So I'm excited. Thank you, Aditya. All right, how to write the polythematic. All right, so this is pretty typical. All right, pretty simple. Start with a sketch of your melody and chord progression. All right, so far we're not changing the process too much. Melody, chord progression. That's how I start all of my sketches. All right, step number 2. All right, start by finalizing your melody and bass line first. All right, so if I wanted to give a little more personality to my bass line, definitely, I can do that if I want. It's fun. It can be cool. Just don't want to get too carried away, especially in orchestral music. But the idea is the melody and bass line from the initial sketch are the only things that are carrying over. So I want to make sure I'm solid with those first. Once I have my bass line and I have my melody, then I can take my chords and I can write a counter melody using mostly chordal tones in between the melody and, why can I not type today? And bass line. All right, so counterpoint can work really well for this. Counterpoint can work really well. I have a video on counterpoint. If you haven't checked it out already, let's just work with this one. All right, so we've got the chords. What we're going to do is we're going to start with just some simple chordal tones. Right? C is already up there. G is already up there. G is the least important note. C is in the bass line, so let's just do this. All right, we got E to C, A and F. Let's do F to C, because I feel like it's starting to make a pattern. And then, why not? Let's go with the G up here, just because I like the kind of shape. And then G, D. Let's go with B, just because B is a little more important. And then let's just do this last one. Let's get rid of the A, because we already have A in the bass line, and go down. And so now we've got basically this 4-bar idea. We've got our chordal tones. If we were to listen to this, right? So now we've got the makings of a little melody. All right? So let's write something contrasting. All right? Let's do stepwise just 2 quarter notes. And then we'll do a little bit of syncopation at the end. Then we'll block down. And so we've got this motif now. Quarter note, dotted chord note, 8th note. So now let's try to follow this pattern. We're just going to build a very simple idea. We'll launch back up to the G. And then let's try to do something different actually here. And then No, I was about to do another quarter done. I'm sorry, I tend to get quieter when I start writing. I gotta work on that, especially if I'm live streaming. And then, so we've built a simple idea. All right, so that works. It's passable. It's functional as a counter melody. Our next point is to look for any notes that are played at the same time. G and E, those form a minor third. That's fine. D is not played at the same time as something else because C starts off the beat. G gets held over. No other note is being articulated right at this line other than D. Uh-oh. B and C. That's a very dissonant sound. All right, so since these two notes form a very dissonant interval together, I want to make sure they're not starting at the same time. I could try trying different combinations. If I were to jump up, I could do that. You know what? I think I'm just going to do that. Let's do that. That's interesting. I would say something else we could do is just push it off. But I don't really care much for that idea. So let's just go up to G, because G and B form a major third. That's consonant. E is not being articulated at the same time. F and A, that's fine. F and C, that's fine. G and D, that's fine. F and D, that's fine. A and E, again, that's fine. G and C, that's fine. And no notes are being articulated at the same time as that. So now we can just listen to this. So now we've got a nice simple idea. If we were to repeat that and just keep developing this as a melody, it'd work perfectly fine. We're going to go into some tips, and then that will actually, when we get into the tips, we'll actually have to start discussing different, we'll have to actually put it in some orchestral music, but let's see here real quick. Let's see, Sean Gilbert, major 7. Was it major 7 in here somewhere? Not sure. Major 7th. I know what you're talking about. The C and the B. Yes. So when we were down here, C is one way. If the C to B, that would technically be a major 7th. If we go down here, these are separated. I like to reduce my intervals as far as they possibly can be reduced, even if it means swapping the order. For me, that just works better. So yes, C to B is a major 7th, but B to C is a minor 2nd. And to me, I just know minor and major 2nds, they're both dissonant. So I just like to kind of contrast. That's just my own personal approach. The idea here is when you're writing a contrapuntal melody, anytime two notes are articulated at the same time, which means they are played at the exact same moment, or they start being played at the exact same moment, you want to make sure they form a consonant interval with each other. If they do not, it's going to sound a lot crunchier. For example, if I were to just leave this, well, let's listen to it first. All right, that sounds nice, right? It works. If I were to leave this the way it was, all right, that actually didn't sound all that bad either. Let's increase the velocity a bit so that it's less subservient. Still doesn't sound quite the way I would want it to. Another thing, if we were to lower this an octave, because this is something called octave displacement. The more space you have between two voices, the less crunchy your dissonance is going to be. Suddenly it sounds much crunchier, right? Now if I were to move this up, all right, it sounds nice. Let's get this all back where it was. So yeah, that's called octave displacement. So if you have two notes that you really want to use and they just sound crunchy but you don't want to swap them out, get more space between them. All right, that's how you can make it sound more pleasant. Let's see here. I feel like counterpoint is both my friend and my enemy sometimes. Yes. Counterpoint, incredibly useful skill to develop, but it can be frustrating at times. Animim Beats. Hi. Welcome. Thank you very much for making it to the stream. I know I just kind of butchered your name and just went over. I was like, Animim Beats. Anonym Beats. All right, awesome. There we go. Sorry. I'm terrible at names. Sean Crunch, yes. The bass also being C probably helps. Oh, definitely, yeah. I didn't bother to look at that. That would help reinforce the C, make it a bit cleaner. If we were to mute that, well, we don't need that. That would actually be a fun video. Is essentially going through what makes sounds dissonant, and when you're facing dissonance, how can you basically determine if something is going to be too dissonant. Actually, I think I did a video on that. I think... What video was it? It was part of the melody series. My Melody for Composers playlist has a video, I think, on part writing. I think that's the one where I talk about... Or was that harmony? I don't know. I've got a video somewhere and I talk about how you can manage dissonance. Let's see here. Let's go over our tips. All right, so we've gone over how to write the polythematic texture. We just did write the polythematic texture. Let's write our tips. And there are essentially, I call these the two needs and the two shoulds. So polythematic texture is famous for its incredibly rich sound. If we look at this, this is super simple. We have a primary melody. We have a counter melody and a bass line. That's not a lot of material. That's 3 lines. If we look at the chords, if we separate the chords into 3 lines, we've got at least 5. 5 layers, 5 voices, 5 lines. And yet the polythematic is viewed as being a richer sound. And a lot of that is because of contrast. And so to get the most out of your contrast, I like to say, I'm not going to write these down either. I'm just going to share the notes. I like to say each layer needs a unique motivic idea. Each layer needs a distinct timbre, a different tone color. We have the unique motivic ideas. If we look back here, we see our primary melody starts with a pickup. That's our primary motive. And then in the lower melody, we have... And that's our primary motive. So they've got unique personalities, unique ideas. That's a need. They need distinct timbre and tone color. We'll share that in a moment. And then the 2 shoulds. Each layer should have a distinct contour or shape. That means when one is moving up, the one below it should be moving down, when possible. This isn't 100% needed, but it's helpful. And it goes a long way to make it sound even more rich and complicated. And each layer should not overlap in pitch during the sketching process. All right, again, if you decide to double in octaves, there's going to be some spots where you can't avoid that. But again, kind of talked about what we talked about earlier. The melody here is written an octave higher, octave apart, and they don't overlap with the bass line. This kind of helps make sure each one has their own personality. Now let's go over that unique timbre, that unique personality idea. Let's take this. Let's pop the first one in the flutes. Let's pop the second one into, let's say, clarinets. You know what? Actually, let's try oboe. Well, first, let's double check what's the range. Range E3, D, G. So that would not work well for the oboe, but you know who that would work really well for? Bassoon. Let's pop that in the bassoon. And then the bass line, let's just pop that in violas. All right? Would that fit violas? This is middle C. No, that would not fit violas. Let's put it in the cello. And now let's kind of laugh and enjoy how much my computer struggles to play these. But first, actually, let's listen to the piano. We're going to listen to it first on the piano. So there we have our main idea. Now let's mute the piano. Let's listen to it. It's going to sound a little more rich now that it's in the flute, bassoon, and cello. What's going on here? All right, 1 second. Let's Let's get my sleepy computer working. Alright, so it's kind of gets there. You get the point. I wonder why all the bassoon part didn't copy. But yeah, the main idea is the more contrast you can have between your different layers without having to go through a bunch of work and make each of these libraries perform at their best. Essentially what this does, what's going on? Why is it not posting? Oh, I think that's why. I was pasting it into the cello. Each layer can produce a little unique sound that gives it an extra kind of layer of complexity. So we've got a flute playing the melody. That is one timbre. We have a double reed playing the counter melody. That is another type of timbre. And in the bass line, we have strings, which, again, you guessed it, are another type of timbre. Put it together. What is up with these cello? I don't know. Libraries don't always sound great out of the box. And at this point, I'm a little tired, all right? I've been kind of rambling for an hour. I'm not going to spend the time to make this sound good. So, sorry. Just take my word for it. It would have sounded better if I did it in finale, which is what I like to use more often. But not everybody reads sheet music, so I try to keep it from being too exclusive by using a DAW. But, yeah. So, when possible, use each distinct timbre and tone color. Follow each of these basic rules. Again, if you are looking for a video that goes more in depth on each of these textures, I plan on coming up with them in my new orchestration series. But for now, as a quick reminder, Ryan Leach, check out his channel. It's awesome. Orchestration Textures playlist. And then Creative Orchestration by George Frederick McKay. Each of these, or both of these, I should say, fantastic resources to learn more about orchestral textures and how that kind of can be put together. And again, yeah, check out Ryan Leach's channel. It's incredible. I love his content. So, yeah. With that, wow, yeah, we've gone 8 minutes over time. So I'm going to stay in for a little bit longer. If you have any last questions, please shoot them my way. I'm going to mute everything here except for the piano. I will just kind of listen to these textures again. And while they play, I'll look over at different stuff here. Let's see the bass. Vivek, hey genius. Oh, thank you, Vivek. I appreciate that. It's always fun to have you in the stream. I'll say Talpatar Shapai. An issue I face always when I make harmony the melody I want as make a harmony the melody I want as main changes the way I don't want. Any suggestions regarding it? How do I keep the melody I want and still make harmonies? Let's see here. Let me see if I'm understanding this correctly. When I make it a harmony, the melody I want as the main changes the way I don't want. You're trying to learn how to harmonize your melodies, if I'm understanding that correctly. Yes, that's another topic entirely. However, if you would like, I have a video dedicated to that already. So, Talpatar, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Check out my playlist, Harmony for Composers. All right, I have a video in that playlist about harmonizing melodies. If that doesn't help, shoot me an email. I'll see what I can do to help out. I'd be more than happy to tackle it in a live stream. In fact, that would be an interesting idea for a live stream, which reminds me, if anyone has any content ideas, any topics that you would love to see me cover in one of these live streams, let me know. Usually my students are the ones who pick the material that I teach. So yeah, let me know. This is what I like to do. Again, if you're interested in private lessons or learning more about them, check the link in the description. For now, we have a bit of homework. All right. As usual, keep studying those instrument ranges, registers, and tone colors that I shared earlier in this live streaming series. All right. It is incredibly important to understand the instruments you are writing for. You cannot write effectively without understanding what you are writing for. The other one, try writing a few 8-bar melodies and chord progressions of your own, all right? So write at least 5 sketches, all right? 3 homophonic, 1 sustained, 1 rhythmic, 1 arpeggiated, and yeah, maybe try a 4th one. Try to make some combination of the 3. And then try writing at least 2 polythematic pieces, all right? The more practice you get in using the things we learn, the more second nature it becomes. I mean, how long did it take me to write that counter melody? Not long at all. I just kind of was like, 2-3 minutes? And that's because I have written so many counter melodies in my life. I have sat down on some days and just cranked out 8-bar piece after 8-bar piece. Not all of them were good. I hated most of them, all right? And lots of the times I hate that little exercise. I hate the monotony of it. I hate how constricted it feels at times. But I can't argue with the effect it's had and how when I do need to write something, it no longer feels intimidating. And that's really what all the practice is about. Practice, practice, practice. Memorize, internalize all the information about all the instruments so that you don't have to reference a list or a book or something when you want to write a clarinet solo. You already know in your head what the preferred range registers and tone colors of that instrument are. Practice counterpoint so that you don't have to have a cheat sheet in front of you reminding you of the steps for counterpoint or the rules for counterpoint. You just know, all right, I've got to write a counter melody kind of thing. So that's kind of my soapbox moment. Practice, practice, practice. If any of you are two-set violin fans, look, practice the 40 hours a day, right? All right, so also, last bit of homework, leave a comment on the video, all right? So comments help a lot. So do likes, so do shares. If you want to help the channel grow, share the channel with someone you know will appreciate it. Leave a comment on the video, even if it's just something nice saying support. Thank you, I would really appreciate it. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and of course, let me know what you would like to see covered in future streams. A few more questions. Aaron Bird, thank you. Glad to help. I did, yeah. Glad to help. Will you feel bad if my music? No, not at all. Listen, my music. You know, I should share some of the first pieces I ever wrote. Yeah, that'd be fun. Composing is a long process. It's a skill. All right. So I never listen to something and think, "Ooh, that was bad," unless the person comes in bragging about how brilliant or talented they are or something. Really, if you humble yourself, you'll be exalted, as the saying goes. If you exalt yourself, you'll be humbled. So, yeah, just send it. I love to hear any music that anyone wants to share, all right? And I'd be more than happy to give a bit of feedback. Telpatar, again, please give me some suggestions for how to prove on brass. Ooh, how to prove like brass instruments. I actually have. I have a video on that. A stream, I think, what was it? So we did, last week was finding the right notes. Then, no, that was Tuesday. Then the Thursday before that was percussion. So about a week and a half ago, I did a live stream writing for the brass section. I think that should help. All right, I share 4 traditional roles. How the brass can be used for fillers, how the brass can be used for harmonic support, melodies, and helping to build climactic moments. So check out that stream if you get the chance. That should help. After that, yeah, if you still want some pointers, I'd be more than happy to help. I already have one orchestration playlist. It's a little dated, but I'm going to be releasing some more soon. So keep an eye on it. I hope that helps. But with that, we have run out of time. I am going to download these notes, this lesson plan that I just shared. I'm going to add the link to the description of this video afterwards. So, good question, Aaron. What about the combinations of instruments to create texture? Yes, so that is a fantastic choice. Essentially, that comes down to doubling. All right, I was supposed to talk about doubling last Tuesday, but it kind of got away from us. Time got away from us. We spent a lot of time talking about selecting the right instrument and talking about my process for that. So essentially, whenever you're orchestrating, start with primary instruments first. Especially in my approach, I will pick one instrument to play the melody. I'll pick one instrument to play for the counter melody, and one instrument to play the bass line. After I've done that and I've found my primary instruments for each layer, after that I'll start adding more instruments. I'll say, all right, well, the melody is feeling pretty good, but I want to maybe double it an octave higher with the violins. Well, in order to keep it balanced and have a much stronger melody, I need to add something to the counter melody to make that a bit stronger, as well as the bass line to make that also a little more prominent. And all of this is going to be covered in my new series on orchestration. Like I said, starting next week, every Thursday, I'll be releasing a video. Advanced Orchestration Techniques is going to be the name of the series. I think I might change the name. But the very first video are the 3 pillars of great orchestration. We're going to go in depth on those, how you can make sure each of your piece you write follows those 3 pillars, and how to make sure that you're getting the most out of your arrangements. With that being said, though, we have now gone an hour and 16 minutes by my math, but I'm terrible at math, so don't take my word for it. So I'm going to sign off. All right, thank you very much to everyone who showed your support for the channel and who was part of the stream. I appreciate each and every one of you. A special shout out goes out to my patrons. I'll be naming a few of them in the video 1 week from today once we get back to the regular schedule. I appreciate all of you guys, all right? So until next time, keep studying, keep working hard, and keep writing new music. Have a great day, my friends. See ya.